Hello, welcome to the Middle Ground Mic. No left, no right, forward. If you enjoy the show, go to the website, themiddlegroundmic.com/newsletter. Sign up for our newsletter for weekly information and special letters throughout the week, depending on what's going on. Today's episode, we're going to unravel what's rarely discussed: the untold story of how our country's future is being quietly reshaped. Not by the crises that always seem to grab our headlines, but by deep structural fractures, a political fissure that's turning neighbors into adversaries, an economic chasm creating two totally different Americas, and a social rupture that's dissolving our shared sense of identity and belonging. But the story isn't only about division. Hidden within the fractures are pathways, glimpses of change, and signs of hope. We'll explore both the challenge and the potential for a better tomorrow. If you believe connection matters more than collapse, like I said, hit subscribe now. Whether you're Apple, YouTube, Spotify, or whatever it is, follow, rate, give us some comments. Let us know how we're doing. And join our Finding the Middle newsletter, like I said earlier. Let's dive into the untold story of what's dividing America and our future and see what it might hold. We're going to begin naturally with kind of what a lot of shows, right? News and politics, right? The political fissure, house divided. You know, uh, Here's the twist: the fissure isn't only simple disagreement. It's a divergence of reality, how people see the world, trust institutions, and even trust one another. That's the untold piece. Now only 34% of Americans identify as political moderates. A lot more are identifying as independents. A dramatic drop from the 43% in the early 1990s. That's the case everywhere. I had a disagreement with a friend today, and he didn't like my sarcasm because of some things he was saying, and it just turned into he just had a fit of rage, and I wouldn't engage it. And he likes to do the "oh, you're holier than thou" thing. And no, man, I love you and I respect you, especially the stuff that you and your wife have done for everybody. So even if you don't want to be friends with me anymore, that's your choice. You want to attack me, that's your choice. But I'm not going to engage in it. Does that make me holier than thou? Maybe. Why? Because I won't trash you? I'd now, to be fair, I did call him a Looney Tune at one point because he just kept going and kept getting madder and madder. But, is what it is, right? But let's kind of get back to it, right? The trust in our federal government is near historic lows. Only 22% of adults say they would trust the government to do what is right just about always or most of the time. Really, you shouldn't even trust them that much. It's why I advocate things need to get done at the state level. Republicans at the state level here in Michigan worked with Democrats to get more things done for students than have ever been done in this state's history before. Conservatives came to the table and helped make sure funding was there in Michigan. But for whatever reason in Washington, D.C., we can't get this stuff done, no matter what side of the aisle it's on. When I was talking to my friend earlier, I believe there was a poll for Democrats that put their party approval rating, I believe, at 19%. Trump/Republicans approval rating is at about 37%. And I'm not saying, ooh, that makes the Republicans better than Democrats. No, exactly what I said. Isn't it sad that like a 37 something percent approval rating makes you the majority in the voting? Like, wow, that is terrible. It's a far contrast from when Ronald Reagan won 49 of 50 states. 65% of Americans now say they often feel exhausted thinking about politics because you can't have a civil conversation with a lot of people anymore. There's certain people who I won't even talk about my show with, even though I would love to, because in a lot of other areas I can talk with them all day. But the minute you bring something up that they don't agree with or you question, like not like question who they are, right? You'd be like, oh, isn't this or something of that nature, like they turn to instant rage. And only 10% of our country says they feel hopeful. To me, that's disgraceful, and we should all be ashamed that we have come that far. Or we have gone that far, I should say. A lot of research is showing, that facts are collapsing. People don't care. They're going to believe what they want to believe, or they're going to cherry pick different things, right? 8 in 10 Americans believe supporters of no matter which side of the aisle you're on, either side, don't even agree on basic facts. Like, if a Democrat says the sky is blue, Republicans are going to be like, fake news, it's green. I mean, and vice versa. Republicans says, oh, fake news, it's green, and you're a fascist. Like that's how it is. Like, I mean, they literally, you could have the cure for every disease, balance the budget, everything's great, America thrives better than ever has before, and they would literally not do it. Neither side would, because they don't want to appear working with, I don't know. I mean, they'll say their political reasons, but it feels like it's got to be more than that. I mean, the fact that we can't even agree on some of the basics is just, it's terrible. I mean, especially fascism, man. People, we are not in fascism. Okay. Are there some things that are going on that definitely come across that way? Yeah. And they are tendencies and certain things that happen, but we are not in a fascist state. And everybody likes to point at the Trump administration. These things are happening under Biden, okay, as well. Notice I'm saying as well. I'm not excusing what Trump's doing. I'm saying as well. I wholeheartedly disagree with some of what we're doing, especially when it comes to free speech. But if you really want to know where a lot of this power to do these things came from, we only need to look in the mirror. It's from us. We voted for all the politicians, kept them in power. A lot of them are still in power to help pass the Patriot Act. You don't believe me? Go look it up. Go look at it. It authorizes the government to do our government to do so many things that you think it's evil media. No, it's a lot more than that. Look up the Patriot Act. Study it. It erodes your rights, and it literally will erode your ability to trust anything that comes out of almost any agency. And I think most of the people that work in those agencies are good people, right? But you got leaders at the top of all these levels, no matter what party's in power, that skew things to do that. You could have an unemployment rate that says, okay, well, minorities unemployment rate has dropped 4%. So that there can be like, unemployment rate has dropped 4%. But it's only going to be talking about certain sections, right? It's not talking about the overall picture. But like everybody will skew that right and going, hey, overall rate for unemployment dropped, but increased for this, lowered for that. Like, even given a brief synopsis, right? They won't do that because it may somehow benefit the other side. Institutional and structural incentives now reward polarization. Look at John Fetterman. John Fetterman said, I won't vote to shut the government down. And now Democrats want him out of there. Literally. They talk about the government, but literally, because he says he doesn't want to vote to shut the government down, his own party's trying to primary him. Now, Republicans, before you go going, Republicans were trying to do the same things too when there was moderates that voted to open the government. Okay, so let's be real. But the fact that somebody says they want to do the right thing somehow gets you primaried. How terrible. People want a lot of these structural things. They want safe districts, primary challenges. Everybody wants a social media echo chamber. They just want to hear what they want to hear. If I criticize a Republican, I get called a leftist, liberal, or communist, whatever you want to call it. If I criticize a Democrat, I am worse than Donald Trump. I got told that today. Yep, I'm worse than Donald Trump. I'm more MAGA than him, something like that. I'm a POS and this, that, and the other thing. Why? Because I said something that's you don't like about a Democrat? I say it about Republicans too. Oh, your show this, your show that. It's fake. You're not middle of the road. Well, here's a reality check, right? Middle of the road means we're finding the middle. It doesn't say I don't necessarily take sides. There's things that I do take sides on. I've said that on this podcast plenty of times. I'm middle, meaning conservative. But there's like healthcare, very liberal on healthcare, but I believe it should be done at a state level, very liberal. With education, with some changes in there with how we fund administrative aspects, I'm very liberal on that. Do I believe we should have complete free college education? No, but I think for things that we need high in demand in this country, engineers, things of that nature, doctors, yeah, we should have just absorbed that cost flat out. Teachers absorb the cost flat out. Boom. Why? Because now it's going to be an incentive for these people to go into these industries and come up with some kind of different program, because it's insane with student loans that we give the wealthiest banks in this country a better lending rate than we give our own citizens. And it's our money, with only 1/3 of Americans identifying as moderates, the space for common ground, like people finding, okay, we can start here. We both agree that the sun came up today. It's collapsing. There's no middle for people to meet in because a lot of the extremes scream so loud it doesn't feel like it exists. But I can tell you, it exists right here. The middle means that we don't have to see eye to eye. we don't have to be on the same side, but we can find something. We can find something. And I have yet to have one guest on this show where I can't find something, where we can't come to some. I've every guest almost that I've had, we have a great conversation beforehand. They're people, they're humans, good people, great people. I've had some great people that I've developed some good friendships with. When people feel the system doesn't represent them, the trust is going to erode. And when trust erodes, the division deepens. This isn't just a spectacle in Washington. The story is playing out in everybody's home, our jobs, our neighborhoods, gymnasiums, the stores, wherever. Anywhere people that used to feel they shared something, right? You used to go to, your neighbor. Oh, hey, he's down. But oh, hey, man, oh, you're having barbecue now. Like you can know that person, like, and literally never be invited to anything. Because back when I was growing up, man, if your neighbor's having a barbecue, everybody was invited. Obviously, unless they hated you. I talk about that with a lot of guests. I miss that part of when I was growing up. And, maybe simplicity, but life was complex then too. It's just different. But it was because the lack of social media, we were able to connect with one another to a degree. You know, um, but the untold part, right? This fissure is both cause and effect of other fractures, right? Political division and economic and social division make it worse and vice versa, right? The woke movement, right? That has divided so many people. It's really pushed a certain section of the left further and moderate leaning Democrats towards the right. But it's created a huge gap in there. People of different things have a right to exist, but nobody has a right to force this stuff on others. But yet, within all of this, we do see signs, hopeful signs, younger voters, new coalitions, and more independent identification, even if that means rejecting the old binary, it may signal, and I truly believe in my heart that it signals a renewal in American politics. Gen Z is going to be less divided once they get into power. They're figuring things out. They're navigating what a lot of people didn't have to navigate. Data showing that less than 10% of friendships cross party lines. Families avoid dinner table politics. Civic forums have turned toxic. I mean, literally, I posted a short on TikTok and it said that we should be country before a party. And I got called a bigot. I'm like, what? You mean we should take care of our country before we worry about a political party? That makes you a bigot. Apparently, in America, with certain people, that makes you a bigot. Makes no sense. But our institutions are built for civic engagement, negotiation, school boards, town halls, local media. It's all under strain because people are so like worked up. Things get shut down because that's the only way. It doesn't erupt in pure violence. We've got to be better than that. We got to be able to say, bleep you, we don't agree, and then we go home and we don't want to shoot at each other. The result of all this is pure gridlock. I mean, everything's extremely fragmented in a public that's increasingly detached from its governance. We are increasingly detached. You wouldn't think that, right? But look at the numbers. Look what people are saying. But when you look at line stuff, you wouldn't. But you got to remember that's only a certain section of the country. That's majority isn't doing that. There's an economic chasm going in America. There's two Americas. Underneath this political storm lies something deeper, the economy. Like they used to say in the 90s, it's the economy, stupid. It's the untold story of how this fracture shapes and experiences our life trajectories, our communities, and our communities' futures, or I should say communities' future. The top 1% of households now have over 30% of the country's net worth. The bottom 50% hold only 2.6 to 2.8% of our country's wealth. That means the poor are getting even poorer at a faster rate than anybody ever thought possible. In persistently poor rural communities, only 63% of the residents there have access to moderate or even high-speed internet. A recent Census Bureau that was released shows complex data on the income mobility, volatility, and opportunity. noting that economic mobility remains an extremely large challenge for our country that we are struggling to get over despite our resources. But yet, there are some parts of the mobility gap that are narrowing, right? Research is starting to show a 27% decrease in the black white mobility gap for children born low income between 1978 and 1992. So there are some gaps that are getting better, right? But we have, with our resources and our brain power in this country, we have a lot of smart people here. We should be doing better. We should be doing better. The two escalators metaphor, right? I don't know if you ever heard that. It kind of, I'll just put it out how I understand it, right? It's a metaphor like technology, globalization, asset inflation lift some, wages, opportunity, and infrastructure leave others behind. It's like you can raise the minimum wage, but unless you're doing things to keep costs down, all that's doing is you're just playing the shell game to inflate the numbers at election time. You're not increasing anybody's standard of living. If that was the case, California wouldn't have the homeless problem it has. $80,000 house in Michigan wouldn't be $600,000 in California, right? Just doing that doesn't solve the issue. We have to look at things in a different way. The robber barons that helped fuel America's industrialization, they figured out how to make more products with Americans at a cheaper rate. With Americans. So globalization had really taken effect. So I'm sure if it was, it'd be a little bit different, but they figured out how to make money, make it here at the same exact time. It can be done. They proved it. But when it goes down to it, when you don't own an asset that's appreciating, you fall further behind everybody else in this country, even if you're working full time. That goes back to government debt making your money worthless. Infrastructure like broadband is an economic lifeline that we have to have now. Without it, entire regions risk falling off. We have to do better. We got satellite internet now. Everybody should have access. Well, I mean, we've had it, right? But now it's actually high speed. But we should be doing better than that. We shouldn't be having these issues in this country. The untold part of this, the fracture is not simply rich versus poor. It's location, asset ownership, connectivity, and infrastructure. These things matter. But there are reasons for optimism. Like I always got to look at the good side too, right? Organizations are starting to help out rural and underserved communities for mobility programs. There are things that are there, but it just like I said before, it's not going fast enough with how we are with things that we've done in our past in this country. We should be doing a better job faster. Urban tech hubs, you see booming job markets, rising property values, startup economies. In many rural towns, you see manufacturing decline, the brain drain, a shrinking tax base, which leads to dilapidated buildings, the government not being able to maintain things that it normally would. For individuals in certain situations in both areas, it's leading to fewer pathways upward, more fear of stagnation or decline. And anybody who doesn't know, economics is a social science. It's a social science because how we feel and how we think affects how economics move. Yet where communities invest in infrastructure, the connectivity, human capital, you see stronger recovery and greater optimism. So it shows if we do put something into our people, we can have a more positive outcome. But the problem is either side that wants to put something into people, the other side has a problem with some little aspect of it or somehow it's bad, no matter depending on your side, right? Somehow it's just bad. Not about you, not about me, not about our kids. It's just bad because it's the other side. And then they'll call you names and it's ridiculous. The social and culture fracture, you know, we're not connected anymore. In 2019, 76% of rural students had fixed broadband access at home, compared with 87% in suburban areas. For trust, like it's showing trust is like really starting to break with all the things we talked about before. It leads into this number. Only 34% of adults polled today in this day and age say most people can be trusted, a sharp decline from previous decades. Gen Z, fewer than half say they're proud to be American, compared to 58% of millennials, 71% of Gen X. Part of that is they have a different view of the world than we do. We've really struggled to give them the same optimistic view of the world that we got growing up. Now, there always seemed to be a better tomorrow. Well, our politicians don't talk about a better tomorrow anymore. They talk about how bad the other side is that's going to make you poor and it's going to be a third world country in 10 minutes if you vote for them. That's what our politicians push now. They don't push messages of hope like Reagan, JFK, RFK, FBR, even though I'm not a fan of FDR at all, like Truman. They pushed messages of hope. I mean, Clinton even did. Bush tried to. Even Obama tried to push it to a degree. But these kids, they're not growing up and seeing that. All they're seeing is ooga booga. If you do this, you're a bad person and you're a POS and this, that, and the other thing. You know, Gen Z is more ethnically diverse. 49% white compared to 56% of millennials, and are more likely to identify as LGBTQ. They're at 24% than older generations. Connection isn't just social. You need the infrastructure for people to be able to connect to each other, to have opportunity and shared experiences. When those lag, our social fabric decays. That's not an opinion. That's all you got to do is just add it all together, right? Geography now equals identity. Rural versus urban, connected versus disconnected. Both sides feel they're better than the other. They think down of the other kind. Not other kind, I should say, the other side or the other, urban versus rural. But Gen Z is changing that. With they're more diverse. I'm not saying just diverse by race, right? Because that's not what the pure focus is. They're diverse in opinions, but also some of them, a good chunk of them now can be diverse and still talk to each other. I see it with my son every day. They're less tied to the traditional institutions, and I think that scares Washington. This shift may be part of a renewal. The one good thing that may come out of this administration, not one good thing, but is a lot of these institutions are going to be dismantled. They needed to be. They don't serve your interest compared to what they tell you on TV. They don't serve your interest because your standard of living has been going down. Don't just look at the dollar amount that you're making. Look at what you can get for that dollar. What you can get for that dollar amount matters a whole lot more than the amount of dollars you have. Because if I can buy 15 bags of chips for $1, but all of a sudden now I have $3, but I can only buy 10 bags of chips, even though I have $3 now, my standard has went down. So stop believing into the hype that if we just increase it, everything will be better. There's so many more factors to it than that. And the untold story about this is it's a cultural reset. A younger generation is starting to emerge with new and different outlooks, new norms, new potential. The communities that they're in, you're seeing them wanting to invest in their communities. They want to get things that are local anchors like schools. There's renewed interest in libraries, civic institutions that they're changing that they want to see reflect them. They're improving outcomes and they're rebuilding trust amongst the younger generations with each other. You know, but the real world, fewer people participate in civic groups. It's growing in certain areas, but fewer trust their neighbors. A lot of us feel disconnected. I know I feel disconnected. I've become a hermit in a lot of ways. You know, Yet young people are organizing differently. It's digital activism, side hustles, local innovation. This activism is how we may reshape how we belong. But the true question is, can these social networks replace the old ones and give birth to a renewed sense of community and purpose? My opinion is, again, I'm not the whole end all be all, just literally an opinion. We need to find ways to merge old versus new, right? Like, how do we get this to get people to connect outside of here, right? Like, you do that event on Facebook and people actually show up, right? And we connect with each other rather than I'd rather lay here, be unproductive, and I'm guilty of it, and stare into space and waste away hours of my life and then nothing got done. We got to get away from that. I got to get away from that. I have to do better on, what a lot of this is meaning, right? Like, we really got to look at the meaning for a lot of these things. The political fissures that are happening weakens trust in both institutions and in one another. More important than the institutions is our ability to look at one another and agree that the sky is blue per se. I'm paraphrasing here, right? That means a whole lot more than these institutions. Those institutions come second except for us. We come first. We come before these institutions as individuals. We have to learn how to trust each other again. And part of learning how to trust each other again is remembering that just because we don't view things the same way as someone, we don't agree with them politically, don't even agree with them politically, even vehemently disagree with them, it doesn't mean that they're a bad person. Doesn't mean we can't find a way to agree with them on something. Doesn't mean we can't sit down and have a coffee or a beer or whatever, talk about the good times, right? You don't have to have political agreement to have that. And if we really focus on doing that, we can get back to this trust we would have in one another. I use the analogy of Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan all the time, bitter political enemies, but they had dinner constantly. They respected each other as men. You know, the economic chastism is deepening the division by our opportunities, our asset ownership, and where you're at, and how you connect, right? You know, and a lot of that boils down to really people look at the government debt. It's killing you. It's killing you. It's killing your ability to buy groceries. But they're not going to tell you that because then they would have to control spending. And then they'd be like, oh, everything's going to fall apart. Well, guess what? When Bill Clinton controlled spending and raised taxes just a little bit because they had to pay for some things, all of a sudden the economy boomed and the dollar was worth something again. It's like magic. You don't believe me? Just look at history. The better a government's budget is balanced, the better buying power you have and the better standard of living you have. You know, they talk about how our things have gone down over the past 40, 50 years, right? Well, look at the value of the dollar, you know, but, you know, Gen Z is showing us that there's new political identities out there, right? One in three identify as independent. Many reject party loyalty. But millennials and Gen X don't. A lot of them are, a lot of us, I should say, are so aligned that we'll lose everything we have in terms of social friendships to prove our point. I'm guilty of that to a degree, but I have tried to get away from it so much, and I'm going to keep trying. I'm not a perfect person. You know, the social and cultural rupture dissolves our shared identity, our connection, and our belonging to one another and to our communities. We need to reestablish this if we want to have, like, it's our job as adults to make a better future for our kids. And we are not overall because we're worried about being divided. That's the untold story. We're more worried about making sure we're better than the other person on the other side of the aisle or for someone that's different than us than we are making sure our own house gets better. That's what we're worried about. And that's what's hurting us. And I know a lot of people that even some of them act like that, right? But I know them as humans and they're better than that. Like they're significantly better than that. Some of those people are the people that will give you the shirt off their back. But if you say you're the opposite side, they're going to snatch it right back. We can't think like if you're a Christian, Jesus definitely did not tell you to act like that to someone. You know, but together these three things that we talked about just a second ago form the untold story of America's divided future. But also a future where renewal is possible and starting to show. But Gen X and millennials, and I mean baby boomers, they got to remember that that's not going to be that reality isn't going to look the same as it does to us. To me, I personally think every generation, once you get past like 2025, you're kind of stuck in that mode. Like you feel like that's how life should be till the day you die. You know, but why should we have optimism, right? It's easy to look at all the negatives, right? Everybody can point out the negatives. That's the easy part. But what are the solutions? What are we optimized about? What are we optimistic about, I should say? You know, research is showing that the mobility gaps are narrowing in some dimensions of our country, right? And targeted investment in human and capital infrastructure matters and actually does make an impact. It does make our standard of living better. It does improve the quality of life for our people. That doesn't mean we need a gajillion government social programs. It means we need to be measured and pay attention to those things more. You know, and new forms of civic engagement are coming along, right? Like we've been kind of talking digital platforms, local startups, side hustle economies, especially among the younger generations. They're taking that free time and turning it into money. And part of the reason they have to do is because their buying power isn't there. You know, but we are doing more investment in broadband, remote work, rural revitalization can reshape the geography of opportunity. And we can do it. But here's what you can do today. Find someone whose reality differs from yours. Ask them about their job, their town, their hope, but do more important, listen. Don't just listen to respond, listen. Listen, question what they're talking about. And don't question in the way you're putting them down, but question, be like, well, what do you mean by that? I know people get annoyed at me because I'll ask 5,000 questions about the same thing because I want to know the who, what, where, and why. Share this episode with someone because we may not all agree, but because they'll listen. Visit the middlegroundmic.com. Sign up for our Finding the Middle newsletter because bridging the divides matter. Because if we stop talking, we stop belonging. And if we stop belonging, we stop being a nation. And remember, the middle ground mic doesn't mean that everything is like perfectly middle, nobody has an opinion. No, it means that we can figure out how to come to a middle ground, how we can fix things, right? Some people like to twist that. But you remember, this story isn't set in stone. Everything changes. Everything I'm talking about here in 2 years from now could all be garbage. Now, the fractures are real, yes, but there are openings for connection, the renewal, and reinvention. We're at a generational inflection point. The older divides still loom, but young Americans, Gen Z and millennial, like the younger millennials, are changing the terms. We're changing the diversity situation. We're connected digitally, sometimes to our own demise. And we're more demanding of change. That's the untold hope. The tech hub needs the farming community. The policymaker needs the factory worker's voice. Our communities need people who show up and stay. Let's not wait for someone else to fix it. Let's fix it ourselves. Let's bridge. Let's build. Thank you for joining the Middle Ground Mic. If you found value today, like I said, subscribe, share, keep this conversation going. I'm Joe. Until next time, no left, no right, forward.